This is Comic Geek Speak, episode 1687, Black Panther movie review.
You got it on Wednesday, and you was talking about it going to the volume up. These guys will talk about it, everything the geeks love. From cakes to laser beams, opinions like the seasons on everything you read. And comics, movies, games, toys, artists, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek. Uniting the world's mightiest heroes. This is...
I'm Adam Murdo.
I'm Matt.
And I'm Chris Eberly.
Comic Geek Speak.
And welcome to the show, one and all. This is the moment that has been hotly anticipated
Indeed.
Several of us waiting in this room, especially the man sitting to my immediate right, Professor Chris Eberly, as one of his very favorite comic book characters finally pounces even to the big screen.
I made the trek out to the hallowed halls here just to be in person.
And we are thrilled to have you here, Chris.
Indeed. And Matt is in the studio.
Yes, the rare Matt appearance.
Yeah, they dug me out of a pocket universe.
The Mattosphere.
Yep.
He's here. He's sporting his one of his many Boston shirts, I see, and wearing his Jamie's Avengers cap hat.
Yeah, well, basically the only movies I'm going to right now are the Marvel ones. The Marvel Studios, I should say. There's a couple other that I try to make a window for. But since Jamie's not with us, I feel as though he should be represented, so I always try to wear a cap hat or a T-shirt. So I wore this today when I went to see it.
Well, thank you for carrying our brother's standard forward for us, Matt.
Oh, you saw the movie today?
Yeah, they had a 9:25 showing this morning.
Oh, fresh in your mind. Excellent.
Yep, it's the best way to review something.
Yeah.
I saw it almost 48 hours ago, but
Yeah,
still.
I saw it on Friday. Yep.
The impression it made was indelible.
Oh, yes.
But before we begin here, a few economic considerations. We'd like to pay our respects to a couple of our friends and sponsors, beginning with the Denver Independent Comics and Art Expo, or DINK for short, which is a convention in the Denver area. It's going to be held on April 14th and 15th of 2018. And it's put on by one of our old friends, Charlie LaGreca, a.k.a. Charlito, of the Indie Spinner Rack podcast. A few words about the DINK convention. Now in its third year, DINK seeks to showcase the sequential arts, comic books, graphic novels, small press, zines, design, and alternative art forms as part of a well-crafted, two-day, nationally recognized exhibition and celebration of the independent spirit. DINK brings together the creative community of comics, art, tattoo art, urban street art, and fans to promote and highlight their cultural impact, diversity, and relevance in the world. So that is going to be going on April 14th and 15th. Special guests this year are going to include Jeff Lemire, Matt Kint, James O'Barr, the creator of The Crow, Amy Reeder, Howard Cruz, Chuck Forsman. There's going to be a special webcomics focus, including one of our favorite people, Danielle Corsetto, creator of the Girls with Slingshots
splendid.
webcomic, among others, and dozens of other small publishers, creators, exhibitors, and guest artists, national and international. It's going to be a good time if you enjoy comics with an indie flavor or just independent art in general. So yes, again, that's happening April 14th and 15th. You can go to Dink Denver, that's DINK Denver.com. They're also having their own award ceremony, the Dinky Awards. Full details of that are available at the website. And also stay tuned to this podcast. In a future installment, we'll give you fuller details here. Okay, so thanks to the DINK for sponsoring this episode. But this episode is also brought to you by CollectionDrawer.com, home of the Drawer Box Storage System. Now, these have been a perennial sponsor and friend of our show over the years. It's a high-quality collector's product that many of us here on the show use. They're a twist on the standard cardboard long box for the storage of comic books. Difference being you access them not by a lid that lifts off the top, but by a drawer that pulls out of the front. It's like an outer cardboard shell with an inner cardboard drawer that can be pulled in for easy access. Even when your boxes are stacked one on top of the other, you don't have to lift the rest of the stack down to get into the bottom box now. You can just pull the drawer out if you have drawer boxes. And they come in a variety of sizes and shapes. You can use them to store magazines, action figures, LP records, sewing supplies, you name it. And there are also special accessories available, such as the box sort upright dividers and the box locks anchors. And this just in, The drawer box folks have just contacted us to let us know that they have changed the construction. This is a quote from them. Previously, the support sleeve of the drawer box was made with a single wall construction, and only the magazine size used a double wall sleeve. Now they make the support sleeve out of double wall corrugated cardboard for all sizes. What this means for consumers is the drawer boxes are stronger than ever because there's 2 extra sheets of upgraded weight paper in each sleeve. So that means they can be stacked even higher than ever because now they're even stronger and more durable than ever. So those of you who are running out of space for your personal drawer box collection, now might be a good time to order some more because they're even sturdier than ever before.
And you can stack them pretty high to begin with.
Yeah,
so
I think they recommended like
impressive.
5 high, which is close to the ceiling of some rooms, I believe. So, yeah, I think I might have to invest in a few more of those myself. I'm running out of space in my apartment very quickly. So, thanks very much to the folks at the Collection Drawer Company. Go to collectiondrawer.com and order your drawer boxes today. It's a product many of us swear by.
Now, Murd, do you have an arrangement of drawer boxes in tiers in your apartment?
I have what I think is a bank of 5 by 5 right now.
Okay.
Like 5 high and 5 across. And that's just for the comics that I have read.
Oh, God.
I've got nearly as many comics
that only
that I
goes up
haven't.
to about 2003 then.
Yeah. Well, actually, I haven't even put the comics from 2003 in there. Wow. Comics between the end of 2001 and the end of 2003 are still lying around waiting for me to possibly talk about them on my Time Bubble spin-off podcast.
Which you can hear right now, the latest episode, which was magnificent.
That is right. Thank you, Chris. Yes.
I listened on the way out here,
The
actually.
30th time.
Indeed.
Featuring Joker, The Last Laugh, and Doom Patrol by John Arcudi.
Yes, well done.
What I've done is, initially I got those tie-dye straps, and that's how I would keep everything together, so I knew it wouldn't tip over, or it basically kept them together. And then when I finished at our basement, I had to put them in another spot, so I just built like a skid with uprights so that they can stack pretty nicely that way. I think I have 3 across and maybe 5 high, or 4 high, 4 or 5 high.
Wow. That old mad ingenuity.
Yeah. Just another project to add to my list.
All right, are we ready to get down to the nitty-gritty, folks?
Wakanda Forever!
Let's do it.
Get down to vibranium tax here. All right, Black Panther the movie. How best to go? I guess we start with initial thoughts.
Yes.
Yes, and the frickin' swears we save for the end.
Indeed.
All right. Well, you're going to overwhelm the rest of us, Chris, I'm sure, with your positive sentiments of this movie. But I really enjoyed it myself. I went to see it on Friday night, and I am hard-pressed to think of another treatment of a comic book origin character on the big screen that did a better job of realizing the full promise of the character in cinematic terms. You know, that brought to life the inherent coolness that those of us who have read about the character in comics for a long time always knew was there, and putting it up there in that other medium for all the world to see just about as intact as it could be. And it's the Black Panther, his nation of Wakanda, his supporting cast selected from across decades of Black Panther comics. Yes. Many familiar concepts just brought to the big screen very effectively, almost flawlessly. Visually, the concept design for Wakanda and all of the various Wakandan vehicles and tribal costumes and gadgets used by Prince T'Challa in his fight against the enemies of his country, all of it just peerlessly visualized by director Ryan Coogler and his company. It was a great action movie, of stirring effects, and of a pretty strong social importance beyond just the fact that it was a good movie, too. So I was on the edge of my seat the entire 2.25 hours.
Matt, go ahead, sir.
Well, I mean, I'll get into more. I enjoyed it. I was telling Adam before we got started here, I think my biggest hang-up on it was, I would say since last summer, this was probably the comic book movie I was most looking forward to before Infinity War. And I think as it got closer and closer, the hype and everything just kept getting bigger and bigger. So I felt a little bit underwhelmed when it was over. But it's not because of the movie, because I enjoyed it. It's just, when you're sitting there, you're like, this is kind of what everyone's propping up so big. And it just, for me, it didn't quite get there. And again, it had nothing to do with the movie itself. But I thought, that, as Adam said about the supporting cast, I thought it was a nice, I don't know too much about Black Panther except for like scattered stuff. So, but I felt as though you got a good idea of not just who he is, but the country. So this was kind of different in, like, for instance, I didn't know too much about Doc Strange, but you basically get a good gist of, an easy explanation, especially when you bring him back to New York because New York is just a backdrop. Wakanda, they really had to give you all this information about Wakanda itself.
You needed to build the world as well as the character.
Right. So I didn't think anyone really got gypped, whether it be Wakanda or even the supporting cast, to give you more stuff on Black Panther itself. So that I thought was extremely well. And I really like the villains. To me, going in there, I was really looking forward to Michael B. Jordan because I think he's a phenomenal actor.
What else have you seen him in?
He was in Creed.
Oh, yeah. Also directed by Ryan Coogler.
Yeah, I didn't. I saw some of that Fantastic Four movie, and I had some issues with it, and I don't blame him. He did an excellent job acting. I just think he was miscast. But I thought he did an excellent job there. And Chronicle, he was in that as well. But I think he's a phenomenal actor. And I went in there knowing his explanation is this is kind of like a Magneto, Xavier type of dichotomy of points of ideas. And he did not undersell that because that's exactly what I kept thinking as I was watching these two characters. So I definitely believe that it was one of the better villains we've seen in the Marvel Universe so far.
Matt made a great point. I was going to bring this up in my own introductory remarks, which is that there was an enormous groundswell of publicity for this film. I mean, Peter Travers and Rolling Stone referred to it as a masterpiece, for example. And I understand your feelings that when you see that kind of sort of tidal wave of press for any movie, you might go in thinking, all right, is it really going to live up to that kind of press? If this were any other film, I would have gone into it with the same potential preconception, because you've seen this happen many times with movies where they either because for some political reason or whatever the reason they build a film up, and you're going like, okay, I liked it, but it was not, it's not like it's The Second Coming or Lawrence of Arabia or The Godfather. This movie, though, I went into it with very high expectations, not because of all the press. So I went into it, unlike a lot of people go into this movie, but like the people in this room, I went into it as a fan and a student of the character's comic book history, and based on interviews I read with the director Ryan Coogler, and just seeing the trailers, I could tell that unlike many of the other Marvel films, which most of which I love, they really went right to the source material for this film. And as I watched the movie, I almost got emotional at points because I realized how reverently they approached not just the character, but the comic book history of the character. And especially two names, and I hope they gave them money, because it's basically their story, Don McGregor and Christopher Priest. Because the movie was basically their books. And then, of course, the Lee Kirby origin template.
They just sort of cherry-picked a little bit from... I mean, even Shuri, she came from the original Hudlin run.
Yeah, so. And I love how they used her in the movie. But so my expectations were met, and in many ways they were exceeded. And Murd, I think you made a great point before in that this movie reminded me of the original Superman film in the sense that I felt it so perfectly captured the myth around the character, which certain characters when they're brought to the big screen, it may be a fun movie, but they don't capture the inherent myth or grandeur of the concept. This movie did, and I think it deserves all the praise that it's getting. And I want to second what Matt said. Again, Coogler and I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the guy who wrote the screenplay with him. I apologize, but it was written by two people. But they really understood the Eric Killmonger character, and in doing that, that's a Don McGregor, Rich Buckler creation. And they tweaked him a little bit, but in ways I thought that were actually effective.
He wasn't actually T'Challa's cousin, for example.
But I thought that worked so well in the movie. But they really made you realize what a three-dimensional character is. And when you make a villain that interesting, that simply elevates the entire film. And we'll get into this as we move along. The last comment I'll make in the introduction is that I think the other thing they did very well is that they brought the shades of gray that are inherent in the Black Panther's world, the politics, the fact that he's the king of a country, into this movie. And I remember a lot of the reviewers were really just kind of going on and on about how much they enjoyed, because a lot of the movie reviewers are not comic book fans. So you can tell a lot of times when you read these reviews, they're kind of tired of seeing superhero films, New York Times especially. But you could tell in the reviews I read that they were just really taken with the fact that this movie had a level of complexity, especially when we talk about T'Chaka and T'Challa and what happened between them and their family, that you're not accustomed to seeing on these movies. But to me, it's like, dude, read Black Panther, because that's where all this is coming from, basically. So I'm looking forward to going on at length. Let's put it that way.
Well, I did want to ask, that was one of the things I was wondering when I watched it, how accurate is a lot of stuff in the movie? Now, you already said that Killmonger, they tweaked a little bit, but is it that the whole vibranium is from a meteor?
Yes, that's right from the comic.
100%.
A flower, and that's how he got the Black Panther? Okay.
The heart-shaped herb, yep.
Okay.
Everything you saw in that movie, I read an interview with it's Coogler, right, the name of the director, who I loved Creed. We mentioned Creed. I haven't seen Fruitvale Station, which is his first film, which he also did with Michael B. Jordan.
Yeah.
So A Tale of Police Brutality.
Yes, which
right?
put them both on the map. I haven't watched that yet. I'm going to definitely put it on my list. But I read an interview with him, and I could tell, I don't remember which site it was on, but I could tell from the interview that he really read all the books. Like, he brought up the Priest run, and like you can tell that everything you saw in the movie. Now, they changed a few things, but in ways that I thought was very effective. But every supporting character in that movie is from the comic. Maybe they were tweaked a little bit in certain ways, but I mean, wow. I was, throughout the film, just when they show you Wakanda at first, I was actually took my breath away, just because they really caught that mixture of the old and the new in that city, the technology, but then you have like the street markets and like the thatched huts and
they just did a fantastic job of portraying this African wonderland that's just sort of teetering on the borderline between tribalism, tradition, and technology.
Exactly.
Science and spirituality.
And that's the core of the whole
the
concept of
metropolitan and the
Wakanda.
pastoral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was one of the questions I did have. In the comics, did they have it that for the longest time they were just hidden, where they were technologically
In the comic, they don't have a force field like they have in the movie. I can understand why they'd use that as just a kind of an easy narrative device for the film. But in the comic book world, there are people who know about vibranium and Wakanda and its potential, and they're always trying to get into Wakanda and seize it. But and the story of the comic line is always that no one has ever been able to do that. And one of the few things I liked about the Hudlin run, which I've castigated at length when we did our spotlight, one of the few things I did like about it is in the opening issues of his run, he really went into that very effectively, especially with the beautiful John Romita Jr. artwork, about how different groups throughout history have tried to invade Wakanda, seize the vibranium. No one's ever succeeded. So in the comic, the outside world knows Wakanda's potential. In the movie now, in the movie universe, they're just learning that now, essentially. And they set up that nice conflict between T'Chaka and T'Challa about, what is the role of... And that's why I think the way they applied Killmonger was so effective, because he's like, why aren't you using this stuff to, further our people and end all the oppression and so forth? So...
And that really was a good observation on Michael Jordan's part, via you, Matt, about the Xavier Magneto similarity.
Yeah, because I mean, not to get off on this tangent, but I find myself in the kind of reboot of the X-Men that Magneto to be the most interesting character, and I don't know. Some of that I think is because Michael Fassbender, I think, plays him excellently. But there's some times where you're like, he does kind of have a point, and. Again, not to get on completely another side branch, but I think there's a lot of people that the reason why I got off social media is because it seems as though people don't realize they're kind of going down the Magneto path where we're superior or whatnot, and this is why my prejudice towards the other people is because we're superior type of thing. And again, not to go down that branch, but I kind of felt that way with Killmonger is. He's looking at it as we don't have the superpowers that the mutants, but the technology that we could be offering could take us to the next level, and then we could be ruling.
Right.
I just thought it was fascinating. It really got me thinking. 'Cause this was another thing I guess they incorporated into the movie. Colonialism. I guess the one notion about Wakanda is it's been hidden. So Europeans never came over and colonized it. So what would have happened if in the real world, if Africa was never essentially colonized, what would be their potential? Where would they sit in the global powers?
And that's one of the reasons why I think the movie is really striking a chord on a broader sort of socio-political context, is that for most people who are not, hardcore geeks like us who are reading these books, to see a movie realized like a concept like this realized, and if you're an African American viewer, I mean that's very likely going to strike a chord, and that's always been the great narrative device that has really made Wakanda so compelling, is that they were never colonized, there was never imperialism, and then look what they've achieved. I mean, in the comic book universe, and they really go to the film too. Wakanda is essentially the most powerful country on Earth. Mm-hmm. Really, I mean, and I like how in the movie, like Ross, played by Martin Freeman, we'll talk more about as we go through it. He's like, well, you're a nation of farmers. Like, they thought they just had like a little bit of vibranium, and that's what Claw has essentially. Right. But at the end, when the first you saw the post credit scenes, Matt.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, when the one
the UN delegate
says, what do you have to offer us? And he just kind of grins, and that's it. I mean, now we're going to see all that going forward. And I again, this is all guesswork. When you look at the trailers for Avengers Infinity War, you've seen the trailer?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, so it looks like the fight is going to happen in Wakanda, at least based on these clips, because that's clearly the Wakandan army being led by the Avengers and the Black Panther.
The Panthers kind of set a precedent now that his country can be a safe haven for Avengers in
and
danger.
We'll talk further about the White Wolf. That was interesting.
Yeah, not at all the same character as in the comics, of course.
That was actually just going off the trailers that we've seen for Infinity War. Where's Steve? I guess I should backtrack. One of the things I felt, one of the issues, but I kind of liked about this movie is it felt like something that should have been in Phase 1, because I feel like it's occurring the wrong point in the MCU, because we've only got a couple more movies before Infinity War. So I felt like this would have been we could have got so much more either if this came in Phase 4.
Well, they could have done 2 or 3 Black Panther films, yeah. In
Phase 4 or early on, because then you could work that in a little bit more.
I think you're right, but again, going back to the bean counter hypothesis, they probably felt they couldn't start off the properties, the universe, with a lesser-known character.
Well, and I understand that was one of the things I kept thinking of is this would be cool if this was kind of like the beginning or toward the beginning of where we are now, because it felt very like like if the MCU didn't exist, this could be basically Fox would have had this instead of Disney, and it would have held up because it was its own thing. It didn't really take, except for the beginning, too much about what's going on in the MCU.
Right.
So that part I liked, but at the same time, I kept wondering, is there going to be any notion about where's Steve during all this? But then
I was half expecting to see him in one of the post-credit scenes, actually.
I did as well.
I thought he'd have a cameo in the middle of the movie itself.
So, obviously, if you see the Avengers trailer, the great one where T'Challa goes, and get this man a shield. Yeah. Out of vibranium, no doubt.
Oh, yes.
So, I'm confident they're gonna get into all that in that movie, and I'm also confident that Wakanda and the Black Panther will probably play a decisive role in the battle against Thanos, because how couldn't he? Because look at what he possesses. God, this movie was so goddamn good.
I knew it would scratch a long time itch for you, Chris.
I gotta forgive me for getting a little rhapsodic here, but
no, you're instantly forgiven. We were kind of hoping for this.
I just go ahead, Matt. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say I put this on the forums, and I just wanted to touch on something. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, we live in a world, unfortunately, right now. We are kind of put into boxes where if you don't agree with one person, you obviously are the complete opposite. And I don't think that's the way things are. I'm not in a box. I understand the political purposes of this, and to some extent, I hate reading reviews that are basically just the political aspect and not so much about the movie. Now, I understand it's a historical point film for the various reasons, the cast, the director, the writers, and I'm not taking any of that away. And to some extent, I feel as though that should just be the norm. It shouldn't be. This shouldn't be like the gateway. It should have already happened. but that's a completely side thing. I felt the same way about Wonder Woman. I just get held up where a lot of the reviews seem to focus more on the political significance of it as opposed to the movie itself. Not that you can't mention that, but when I read reviews and they're mostly not really so much about the movie, but just what it represents, then to me you're not really reviewing the movie. You're just making a political statement.
Mm-hmm.
So that because then what's also happening is I already read one reviewer who I read the review. Nothing was racial about it, but he was an Irish guy. Because he pointed out a couple things that he just kind of didn't care for, like he mentioned he liked the way Claw was had little jokes and stuff like that, and also he would have liked to see Black Panther do a little bit more like superhero type of stuff, like punching that.
But see, he doesn't understand the character.
I understand he doesn't understand the character, but I was reading reviews of his review attacking him because he didn't like it, and I don't. Because of the political things that's been attached to it, now you can't say anything, even that's completely just.
Right, so if you don't like the Black Panther movie, you must be a racist.
Right, just like with Wonder Woman. If you didn't think Wonder Woman was a masterpiece, well, then obviously you're sexist and you hate women, which I did agree with that. So that's my only big hang up that I had with this movie was just there's so much added on to it that you almost are forced to go with the flow, and you can't.
Well, there's an awful lot of social-political weight that has been...
Right, and to some extent, this is entertainment. I want to be entertained. I don't want some of our political crap bleeding into...
It's inevitable, though, with a character like that, because if you go back to the character's origins, back in 1966, when it was conceived by Lee and Kirby, the Black Panthers is a political character. The way it was introduced, the fact that in 1966 they introduced a super high tech African society that had never been colonized. That's the Lee Kirby concept, and this African hero who basically defeats the Fantastic Four in his first appearance. We have to pause, I think, and realize how radical that concept was for the time it was introduced. I mean, segregation had only legally just ended on a federal level in '66. But it was still in many places throughout the South.
Still is today, I think.
The one review I read about this movie was the Time magazine cover story from last week, and it was one of those largely political reviews you were talking about, Matt. But it mentioned that when the Black Panther first appeared in '66, it was like a month after the beginnings of the Black Power movement such. Stokely Carmichael and so.
Yeah, so
he was introduced in July, and I think Black Panthers, the organization, started in September.
Yeah, the party came out. The party emerged. There was actually a Black Panther political party in Mississippi that was different. Some before that was different than the famous Huey Newton Bobby Seale group that came after. You're right, though, that same year. So I think that subtext is always there, and if you read through the character's history, and this is where most reviewers obviously would not be familiar with this, it's always been there. Don McGregor especially went heavily into different aspects of what it meant to be the Black Panther and his interaction in terms of race and colonialism and so forth. So considering the tenor of the times in our country now, I'm not surprised or put off by all of that. But I will say this, in that, like the one reviewer who said he should have been fighting more, I understand why I'd say that. But if you've read the comic, that's not the character. The character is one of the greatest, combatants in the Marvel Universe, but he's a king. So a lot of times he's going to try to resolve a dispute through diplomacy or through
economic pressure
or Machiavellian strategy, and you see that especially in the Priest run time and time again. So they showed the Black Panther kicking some ass in the movie, especially in the opening when he goes after those that convoy of militants or whatever they were. So that was there, but I was pleased that they also showed him as a king trying to apply reason to his situation, and also struggling with the burden of his role, which is always at the core of the character as well. So I personally don't have a problem with politics being placed into entertainment, but I would agree with you, Matt, in that a person shouldn't be afraid to dislike a film and like, oh God, people are going to think I'm this or I'm that because I don't like this movie. But as the first major, because he's prior to the Falcon, so the first major black comic book superhero, that kind of commentary is going to be inevitable. And I read a ton of reviews going into this. Some I thought were ham-handed. Others I thought were very more subtle and really got the film and, certainly applied that socio-political context. But the Panther, now I'm hoping to piggyback on. I'm hoping they explore this further if they can. You got a little bit of it in the movie, but I want to see more. So much of the Panther for me is his friendship with Ross, and how those two characters, how they bring them together. Now they're not going to make the Ross of the comic, who is, the humorous, wisecracking sort of narrator of everything.
Right. He was based on Michael J. Fox, and largely he was a reader's POV character and also comedy relief.
Yeah.
He wasn't quite the competent hero pilot / CIA agent. He was like a bumbling attaché for the State Department.
Yeah.
And so he's they really kind of they made him look better for the purposes of this movie.
Would you say more relevant?
Well,
I guess I should say relevant, but
maybe more plausible in that world. But
yeah, he was more central to the story, but also more slapsticky, played for laughs.
But that's Christopher Priest's style. But the Ross character, even in the comic, ultimately is a noble character, and I hope they do more with those two because, Martin Freeman I think is perfectly cast in that role, and. I hope it may be difficult with what's coming in these movies, but if they can develop that further, like that bridging of two worlds essentially between those two characters.
I do want to ask for the when they advertise. I don't know if it's a Priest run, but I remember probably the first time I really saw anything about the Black Panther was an ad in one issue years ago, decades probably. But it really caught my eye, and I thought it was interesting. And unfortunately, I just never followed up. But it had a picture of him, I think, jumping through. Like probably a forest or something. It just seemed like a golden background in my mind. But it's something like Reed's brains, Tony's money, Cap's muscles, or strength.
Was that the ad? That was the copy in the advert, the promo?
Yeah, that was just the one-page ad for an upcoming Black Panther series, and it's just like, wow, that's a cool combination. And like I said, I never followed up to learn more about Black Panther.
Well,
whenever I see him, that's what I always think.
Yeah. If that was either for Priest or it was for the books that came after the Priest run that were in basically building off to varying degrees off the Priest run, because what Priest did was, and McGregor too, but Priest especially so, he imagined the full potential of the character because he went into when he was recruited to do it for the Marvel Knights line, he said, well, I really want to explore him not as a superhero but as a king, and that's what you saw in this film. Because in watching the movie, this really isn't a superhero film. It's a film about a man who now has taken on this enormous burden as the monarch of this country, who has this incredible technology at his disposal, and he's also now struggling with the legacy that he's just found out of his whole family and his father. And, his costume is really a ceremonial uniform. It's not like, hey, I'm Captain Marvel, Shazam. There's the raiments of office essentially.
Black Panther's not an alter ego; it's a royal title.
Yeah, exactly. And like when you see, and I thought this was so well done. When you see his father as the Panther, when he goes into that and they both drop to their knees, my king, like that. That's it. That's.
Oh. Well, how about when the Dora Milaje stamp their spears, the lights go out for a second, and suddenly he's standing there.
Yep. And by the way, the Dora Milaje, that's a Priest concept, were so incredibly realized in this movie. The costuming in this film should get an Oscar nomination. It was phenomenal.
I sincerely hope it does.
Yeah, but they were so perfectly captured in this film.
Well, they did sort of downplay the fact that the Dora Milaje are not just the king's royal guard; they're also his honorary brides.
Yeah, they didn't go into any of that.
Yeah. And they didn't include the Midnight Angels either.
No,
but I get the feeling we'll see them in future movies.
And again, the Dora Milaje's role is also to maintain balance between those tribes, so that they each offers someone from their tribe to serve in that position. By the way, How kick-ass was Man-Ape in this movie?
Oh, my Lord. During the opening sequence,
Yeah.
which, by the way, was one of my favorite parts. I knew we were getting a quality film from the start. When the visuals, that of the, it reminded me of that sort of magnetic ball-bearing technology from Krypton
Yes.
and Man of Steel.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Which was the one thing I liked about that movie, and now they put it in a movie that I really didn't hate. But yeah, seeing the visual, using that to tell the origins of all the tribes of Wakanda, the arrival of the vibranium meteor, phenomenally visually done. But as soon as I saw the Jabari tribe going off towards that mountain gateway shaped like a gorilla's head, I was like, holy crap, we're going to see M'Baku.
Yep.
And damn it if they didn't. Fantastic treatment of the Man-Ape.
Yeah.
Well, I like the fact that
He wasn't just another thug with a
No.
gorilla pelt on his head this time. He was actually a responsible, if somewhat headstrong, leader of
and a
his
key
tribe.
player in the story, too,
Yeah.
ultimately. I'm sorry, Matt, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I was reading how they purposely did not use that name, but they gave his costume the gorilla.
Right.
Yeah.
That they made him worship a god. But the casting here was excellent. I didn't think there was anyone that really, even though there were some people I've just never seen them before, I didn't think anyone kind of pulled it down like, maybe you should have been recast. I thought it was excellent.
No, the casting was spot on. I mean, first of all, as we know from Civil War, I mean, Chadwick Boseman he's just perfect in the role of T'Challa. He has the restraint, which that character is supposed to have, the thoughtfulness.
The inner conflict.
Yep. But also that poise. He's magnificent in the role. I couldn't have asked for a better casting. Like you, Matt, said, I mean, Michael B. Jordan just so captured the rage of Killmonger. Now, in the comic, Killmonger's parents were killed by Claw when he first went into Wakanda and did all his damage. And then I think he was taken by Claw's men as like a slave back to the West, and then he ended up in exile. And then he returned to Wakanda in the classic McGregor run in Jungle Action to, again, overthrow the state, essentially. Priest later uses him as Ross describes him, as a cross between Gordon Gekko and Fidel Castro. And he's a revolutionary who wants to sort of remake Wakanda in the Priest run into like a... Almost, he's he's a brilliant stock investor. Like he wants to kind of remake Wakanda, like bring all the modern world into it under his control, essentially. Now they do a little bit different in the movie, but again, you felt the rage of the character, and a good villain is a villain. You can go, I kind of sympathize with him a little bit. Like he's not just twirling the mustache, tying the girl to the railroad tracks, or I'm going to take over the world and that whole.
This is a person who was legitimately wronged not only by the oppressive social system in the United States, but also by his own people, his own monarch/uncle.
And I think that's one of the best aspects of the film was that, and this is so intrinsic, I think, to the Black Panther's comic book world, is that this is not like a straightforward, they're good and they're bad. T'Challa is struggling with the fact that his father, for the sake of the state, right, killed his brother, left his brother's body behind, and left this kid.
Which is a completely indefensible move on a couple of... Not only was it his own flesh and blood he's deserting, it doesn't even make tactical sense. Yeah. It's a loose end. He should have, at the very least, gone back and taken the kid for the sake of national security.
About the kid? Well, I guess he would have had to, because his other spy would have said, well, he has a kid.
Zuri probably would have mentioned
that.
Oh,
yeah. So... And then when T'Challa confronts his father, and by the way, the fact that they brought the land of the dead into it, and they showed, like when they show the panthers on the tree, and then one transforms into his father, like he's one of the...
It's straight from the comics,
it really is. It really, I mean, they... Wow.
Every once in a while, I'll see a movie, and there's a line in it that just sticks with me for various reasons, but one of the things I liked, a line from this movie I really liked, is when Killmonger is back in that land of the dead, and sees his father, and they're talking... And his dad said something like, you and I are both lost. And he says, well, how do you know home isn't lost and just can't find us? And I thought that was kind of an interesting way of looking at things. That's one line I'll be sure to keep, that if I'm ever lost. Just maybe.
That's a good point.
It's an excellent point, my friend.
Clearly informed Killmonger's philosophy towards Wakanda as he grew up. Wakanda's lost, and he needs to help it find itself and help the rest of his people around the world. And
then, in a sense, one could argue that Killmonger's campaign, despite what it unleashed, helped T'Challa find himself too, and his role as the king and what he wanted to do as the king. Let's talk about some of the characters. So you mentioned Shuri, basically as Q from James Bond.
Good point.
Wonderful. I mean, I love the humor, the banter between her and her brother. Like when he falls down, she's filming him on the computer because
Delete that.
you know, she gives him the middle finger. You know, why don't you take me to Coachella or Disneyland? You know, I like, again, you always need those human touches to make these characters relatable. And I thought she was wonderful in that role.
Yeah,
now in the comic, she becomes the Black Panther, so who knows? Maybe we'll eventually see that. We talked about Killmonger. I mean, what I liked about also in the film, and this is right from the comic, they go to Warrior Falls, which is right from the comic, and just like in the comic, Killmonger defeats T'Challa. And if you read through the comic book history, he's the one guy who has beaten T'Challa in hand-to-hand combat. Now in the comic book, Killmonger is like 7 feet tall, like he's enormous. I mean, they can't go that far. But I think Jordan, when they had that fight at the waterfall, you know, I mean, really captured the ferocity and the rage of that character, and he beat him. I mean, he beat T'Challa. And that's right from the book, essentially.
I was reading some of his prep for the role, and one of it is he felt like the character is isolated, so he would try to isolate himself as much as possible during the filming. And he tried to
method acting there.
Emulate a little bit of Heath Ledger's Joker for The Dark Knight and kind of bring that type of, not necessarily madness, but that type of notion into the character. And I just get... I said this beforehand. Before I saw the movie, more and more I saw, I just kept thinking, I'm going into this for basically Killmonger, that Black Panther just happens to be there. And just because I was so overwhelmed with the stuff that I saw in some of the interviews with Michael B. Jordan, and that's kind of how I came out of it. I guess we could do spoilers. I hated the fact that he died at the end.
Spoilers.
That he died at the end. I thought there would have been more rich, but I thought he had that awesome line of, then you might as well just throw my body in the ocean with her brothers. Because they knew they'd rather die than to live in chains.
The way they had him die was perfectly in keeping with the spirit of the character, right to the point where they probably could have healed him with that technology, but he pulled the blade out so he'd bleed out and die.
Rather than continue to be a part of what he sees as a harmful isolationist program.
Yeah,
in Wakanda.
and just like when he murders his own girlfriend because she's being held as hostage by... I mean, Killmonger's a ruthless... dedicated revolutionary in the book, and then they captured that in the film. And I like how they made them cousins. Now, that's not in the book, but I thought that was a great little twist, and it worked with the overall story of King T'Chaka, you know, killed his brother to save Zori, and, you know, that the brother had a son. So I thought that was a masterful narrative device because it just so raised the stakes for T'Challa now, like, I'm related to this guy. Like this guy, you know, could have been me in a different circumstance. And plus, this whole world comes crashing down, and all the preconceptions he had about what Wakanda means, his father, the lineage, all of it is shaken by what happened. And again, it reminds us that people in positions of power, when they're responsible for other people, often have to make very difficult decisions. Like I sympathize with T'Chaka too because, you know, he's responsible for Zori and his brother's going to kill Zori, and his brother was clearly off the reservation, so to speak, in his behavior. That's the kind of complexity a Black Panther story should have. There are no easy options here, essentially. And by the way, I also love how they brought the dogs of war into it, the Hatut Zarazin. And they didn't call them that in the movie; they said war dogs, but those are the elite sort of assassins / secret police who...
And the aforementioned White Wolf, who again was not Bucky in the comics, completely different character, but he was the leader of that group.
Yeah, and like they're the eyes and ears of the Wakandan state, which when T'Challa becomes king, he bans them because he feels that they're too powerful and they're too dangerous, essentially. But Nakia, who was magnificent in the film, she was a dog of war, essentially. They got everything in this movie. I mean, I was really just so impressed by how much source material they effectively put into the film.
Are we going to have to put down plastic for you?
I was thinking as I watched the movie that the drool must have been pooling around your ankles in whatever theater you were watching.
I was just on the edge of my seat and just going, you know, look at that, like just quietly to myself, just everything that they, and again, not it's not like I'm a superior being because I read the comics, but there's so many things in there that if you know the history, you're going to appreciate it.
It enhances your joy and pleasure in watching
all the
film
more.
That much more.
Okoye was amazing, the head of the Dora Milaje.
Yeah. And, of course, she had a lover in Wakabi, another character from the comics.
Now, Wakabi was interesting because I like how because Wakabi's always been a loyal aide or regent for T'Challa, and they captured that loyalty, but also that tension. Now, this is just a very, very minor quibble. In the comic, he never would have turned on T'Challa like that. But I understand for the purpose of the movie, because Claw had killed his parents, he was more susceptible to what Killmonger was peddling, essentially. Forrest Whitaker, great in the role of Zori. Now, in the comic, he's a more funny character.
Yes, much more boisterous.
Yeah, and, telling tales of Wakanda's history and so forth. But I like, again, the role they had him play as he's one of the tormented members of this secret history that's, basically acting as a corrosive, eating away at T'Challa's notion of what his country is supposed to represent. And, he sacrifices himself ultimately.
Redeeming himself for
that. Yeah.
The cost of duty, and the conflict inherent therein. Being loyal to his former king by betraying his new king by keeping such sordid details from him.
And Angela Bassett, of course, majestic actress, great as Ramonda, his mother. Like Matt said, all the casting was just spot on here.
That's another little thing they changed from the comics. So Ramonda's not actually T'Challa's biological
No, it's
mother.
Niamey, but they're probably not going to go into that because it's a minor point. Yes, that's his adopted mother. We should talk about the White Wolf so people don't know what we're talking about in the Priest run. It's a Priest character. Yeah. He's a white guy whose parents' plane crashed in Wakanda when he was little kids.
Sort of like what would have happened if Lord Greystoke's origin had happened in Wakanda.
Exactly. Well put, Murd. And his parents died. He survived. T'Chaka takes him in, adopts him, raises as his son. This is before T'Challa was born.
And he was going to be the heir apparent until a biological son was born to King T'Chaka.
Yeah, and then T'Challa's mother, Niamey, dies. T'Chaka marries Ramonda. And, what's the White Wolf's actual name?
They just call him Hunter.
Hunter, that's right. He kind of goes into the background, and there's resentment there, but he's a patriot, and he becomes the head of the Hatut Zarazi. Now, it looks like they're setting Bucky up now, possibly in that role. And it would make sense because Bucky's probably wanted all around the planet at this point in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so he'd have a safe haven in Wakanda and perhaps could find purpose in Wakanda. Because Wakanda is not a racist society by any stretch. So I'm interested to see, because they show in the Avengers trailers, they show Bucky at the front leading Wakandan forces, essentially. So
yeah, because actually not knowing anything about what you guys were just talking about, seeing the trailer is like, is Bucky leading them? So, I mean, from what you're telling me, it's a good possibility that he's leading that group.
What do you think of the casting, Murd?
There's a lot of it was spot on, wonderful. You mentioned Forrest Whitaker and Angela Bassett, two well-experienced black actors who are really bringing their talents to bear here to help dignify the proceedings. All the Dora Milaje were wonderful. Chadwick Boseman, as we've said, he really inhabited the character perfectly. Probably the best. I've forgotten his name. Winslow Duke, I think.
Winston Duke.
Winston Duke,
M'Baku,
yes, as M'Baku, yes. Once again, I've already said how happy I was at the way that they decided to treat that character.
I'm kidding. We're vegetarians. Anyway, go ahead.
Yes. Probably the best, though. Andy Serkis as Claw.
Oh.
Claw only made like 2 appearances as a
fun.
human being before he turned into that pure sound being that you remember from Secret Wars, Matt. But Andy Serkis in this role looked exactly the way Claw did, sort of a muscular, thick-set, the beard around his neck, and he's got that great Dutch accent going. I think he's supposed to be South African in the movie.
South African,
in the comics, though, he's Dutch. His father was a Nazi war criminal. And that's kind of how he became. His father stumbled into Wakanda during the war and learned about this vibranium mound, and that's how Claw himself became obsessed with it later on. But Serkis just played that role to the hilt.
And I was impressed that they killed him too.
I was kind of disappointed. That's
Yeah, I
one
thought you would be.
One of two disappointments I had with this movie was that we didn't. And it's still, as you said on the forums a little while ago, Matt, it's not impossible that we could still get the sound being claw. Perhaps Shuri preserved his brain and used his brain patterns and trapped them in some kind of sonic experiment she was doing as a way of torturing him further after death. And then he manages to take control of the sound
They should get
gestalt
Murd in
he's
on these plot
occupying.
conferences.
Well, because I figure when you hire Andy Serkis,
Yes, whose specialty was motion capture.
yeah, that there's probably going to be more than just an arm that's motion captured. So that's why initially when I
Could
saw
be.
he was
That's a good
cast
point.
for Age of Ultron. Okay, so they're going to do at some point the sonic or the sound version of him, but I can't rule it out yet.
I hope that we do get that, although it doesn't seem likely.
Well, what I did like about the killing of Claw, because to me, even though Claw is inherent in the Black Panther's origin, I've always considered Killmonger the Black Panther's greatest adversary, and I think the movie established that because Killmonger defeated him basically, and that's again right from the comic. What was your other disappointment, though? You said you had two.
Well, the other one was related to the casting, and I fear it's one where I'm in disagreement with you,
Okay.
Chris. I never did dig Martin Freeman too
Fair
much
enough.
as Everett K. Ross. I was hoping for part of that is just the way the character's written
Yeah.
too, but I was hoping somebody younger and somebody a little more versed in comedy, maybe someone who's actually American. Since his accent didn't it rang a little false to me. You can tell he's not American by birth. But yeah, we needed somebody almost more like a Michael Cera, or even like Jesse Eisenberg. He would have made a better Everett K. Ross than he ever did a Lex Luthor. Yeah, actually, I could see him in that role, in fact. But again, that's really more the way they decided to write the
Yeah,
character.
I mean, I understand where you're coming from there. I mean,
He's supposed to be the king of the useless white
Yeah.
boys. That's Christopher Priest's own
yes,
term.
and I just think that we're because of for the purposes of the movies, we're never going to get that Ross probably.
Yeah.
Which I lament that. Believe me, Ross is one of my favorite supporting characters in comics. Period.
He was essential to the Priest run.
But Martin Freeman does have a lot of comedic ability, so we'll see what they do with it. But I understand where you're coming from there. I love Martin Freeman as an actor, and there's potential there in that dynamic between those two characters. As I hope they realize that, because that relationship is so crucial to so much of the Black Panther's comic history. So we'll see what happens with that.
You had mentioned about his accent. One of the things I took that I kind of was like, for the movie was it seemed as though that there was no accent continuity. Like Chadwick Boseman had an accent, but I didn't quite feel as though everyone else, that's at least his family, because I understand in different tribes they might be tweaked. Mm-hmm. It felt as though he had an accent and everyone else kind of did something not quite the same, but there didn't seem to be any of the continuity that I thought they would have established. And I understand that I pronounce it M'Baku.
M'Baku.
Yeah, that I was reading how that actor or Winston, he did something. He looked for like something that's similar from another country, just because they're a different tribe. So he wanted not to be the exact same. Oh. But I felt even the royal family, you'd think they all grew up, they had the exact same accent, but they just didn't seem the same. That was one of the things that I was like, they should have probably tightened that up a little bit.
Well, it's hard to bring in a dialect coach for a country that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So I guess everybody just kind of did what they could. But I like your explanation. I'll send you a no prize for it, of the different tribes, different accents.
Yeah.
How do we think this movie, and Matt, you referenced this a bit before, let's elaborate, works with the overall Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Well, it's certainly changed the balance of power in the global stage of the Marvel Universe. Now that everyone knows that there's this technological superpower hidden in Africa.
How will it, or how does it?
Or you run with it any way you wish, sir.
Okay. Just to go back to what I said before, I think if this was phase one, this would be awesome to see how the ripple effects. And it would, at this point, there's kind of a staleness where everything we've seen, with the exception of Guardians of the Galaxy, everything we've seen has kind of been, we've known about. And then this comes along. Just like as Guardian of the Galaxy kind of seemed like its complete own thing when that came out. This, again, seems like it's a complete own thing. So I'm curious to see how it'll build. But I do, the fact that the majority of what we've seen from the Infinity War trailer is in Wakanda. So it looks as though we'll get to see even more of that to see how how important this country is. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it does. I just want to know what you guys thought, because from the perspective of the comics, Wakanda is so integral to, the politics and the economics of the Marvel Universe in the comics. I'm pleased to see them taking steps towards that now in the movies, because, like you said, Matt, once that world realizes what Wakanda is capable of, that's going to change everything. So it's interesting how in the film universe, whereas the comics, they always knew, in the film universe, except for Claw, and virtually nobody knew what that country is capable of. So I'm really interested to see how they apply that. Now, I like the fact that they have, at the end, T'Challa is going to Oakland, and he buys up all those dilapidated housing projects.
Wonderful symbolic gesture.
Yeah,
taking the site of his father's greatest failing as father and king, and using it as the site for the future Wakandan outreach to the world.
Yes, and if you go back to the comics, at one point he was a teacher in a high school in Brooklyn, and then in the Priest run, that whole run starts with him going to New York because a charity he had established was being undermined by sinister forces, and that's where he meets Ross and so forth. But I'm actually hopeful that in the second film, as much as I still want to see plenty of Wakanda, they show the Panther also in that world now, trying to establish that outreach.
Right.
That was a great ending to the movie, too. Who are you? And he just kind of smirks.
Yep.
Yes, I was very happy that in the end he takes. I keep trying to say Njidaka because that's the Wakanda name of Eric Killmonger.
Right.
But, he takes Killmonger's point to heart, but he rejects his methodology. Instead of trying to rectify the world's wrongs against his people by force, he tries to do it by education and outreach.
That's pure T'Challa, basically.
Well, and ultimately, isn't that what happens? That what you try to fight against by using similar methods, only with superior power, it's the abyss thing. You're looking in the mirror, and the next thing you know, you realize you've become what you've always fought against and tried to overcome.
Yep, you're just feeding a vicious cycle.
Right. So, the fact that T'Challa took the idea but ran a different way was, is the way it should be. But
and in keeping with that confrontation, what do you think of that final battle on the veldt? Right, with the rhinos, and the rhinos out of Jungle Action stories. I just ate that up. It's so fun.
It's been hinted at in the comics that vibranium has mutagenic properties if you're exposed to it long enough. So I think perhaps the rhinos, being the dimensions they were and intelligent enough to be trained, might have something to do with the Great Mound. They were a great touch. What I said about the balance between pastoral and metropolitan. You've got the great city of Wakanda, and then just the other side of the hologram, you've got a rhino farm.
Yeah.
I kept thinking, because aren't they doing a live action Lion King this year or next year?
Are they?
Did
I don't
with
know.
the Jungle Book, and I kept thinking
a film version. You mean?
Yeah, like they did with the Jungle Book not too long ago.
Right.
I kept thinking, are people going to watch The Lion King thinking, where's Black Panther? Because of just some of the scenery that we saw in this, which was beautiful. Even like when the sunset that
that was filmed in, I think that was filmed in Georgia, by the way.
Oh, was it?
I believe so. Yeah, it wasn't filmed in Africa.
Georgia, United States, or Georgia, Asia?
United States.
Okay.
Yeah.
But like with the sun, and I was like, I kind of see, you can almost see the scene from Lion King where he's holding up his son.
Yep.
But, there are going to be some comparison. Well, I guess people have described this as kind of Lion King, James Bond. I think there's another one that they throw in there as well.
Batman, perhaps?
Well, yeah,
No, I don't think Batman. Luckily, that hasn't been one of the...
T'Challa has that international intrigue aspect to his story, and I thought when they went to South Korea...
Yes, I was just going to mention that.
I thought they captured that very well. And
the technological excellence of Shuri,
actually
getting to get in there with her holographic car and participate in the chase.
Yeah. I like that. What was that when she ran over that guy?
Yeah.
Just keep driving.
Yeah. Between Shuri and the Dora Milaje, female black geeks around the world have got much reason to cheer
absolutely.
in this movie.
And again, what people have to realize is that it's all from the books. Like none of this is just let's just throw that in there. The whole movie essentially came from I have to go back to it because in so many comic book adaptations they don't really do this, or movies do it to vary. Like I said, I think the original Superman did it masterfully with the Richard Donner film. But this movie, I was just in awe of how, And I read an interview with Coogler where he said, Marvel basically let him. He said the only thing they didn't let him do. He said he wanted to bring Kraven the Hunter into it. And they said no.
Well, yeah, because there's still some entanglements with Sony. I would
That
guess.
would have been cool.
Because he mentioned how he loved the battle between the Panther and Kraven the Hunter in the Priest run. But he said otherwise. He said they pretty much let me do what I wanted to do. And once again, when you have the right director, you let them do what they want to do because the movie is testament to that because. Besides being an outstanding filmmaker, the guy's clearly a fan, and he brought it all in. And we've all seen enough comic movies to know that how often they don't do that in an adaptation, for better or for worse.
And we're usually left shaking our heads in mystification as to why they didn't, because this stuff became popular in the comics for a reason.
Yeah.
Because it was built to be cool in the comics, so why not just let it be what it's meant to be on screen?
Yeah. So I agree, and that was one of the things for me as a longtime lover of the character, as a fan, was most thrilling was just to go, oh my God, look at they actually read all these comics, like they really read them. I mean, it was
got the core of the character, his whole world, his milieu, his supporting cast across the decades, and it all just lives up there.
Yeah, and to go back to Matt's initial points. A lot of the film's success, I think, should be credited to Michael B. Jordan, though, because his rendering of Killmonger was so well done and so multidimensional. And again, brilliant conceit that they bring in the whole T'Chaka, killing his brother like that. That for me, that's what especially elevates this film because it brings in that shade of gray complexity, which I think should be in a story about a king running a country that has those certain characteristics. So, I'm hoping I'll get a chance to see it at least a second time before it leaves the theater. But I mean, for me, this is one of the best films Marvel's done yet.
One of the best superhero movies ever made.
You want to put it on the top of the Marvel Studios?
Well, forgive me, I don't remember which. Someone on the forums recommended we eventually do a top 5 MCU, which I think we should do after Infinity War. That's my.
Well, yeah, we'd have to wait until the end of the current phase, just to be fair.
It's right now. It's way up there. I mean, in terms of just as an adaptation, in terms of capturing the spirit of the character, in terms of just a masterfully told story. That like this movie felt like. It felt like it meant something. Like there was a heft to it that some of the other Marvel movies or other comic movies just don't have. Now, granted, to be fair, I don't expect that from Ant-Man, for example, and I loved Ant-Man, but this is a movie I think is on a different level because again the character is on a different level than a lot of the other superheroes he's not a superhero. So
he's a monarch who acts as a superhero when it's in the best interest of his country.
Right. So, I'm interested to see. I'm assuming they're going to do a sequel.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt of that. I mean, it's well on its way to. Oh, it broke Deadpool's February opening record.
I don't know. The 4-day run is over 200 million.
Wow! Holy mackerel!
That will probably
I think I saw
do
like
it.
218.
Okay, so they're definitely doing a sequel.
There will be more of these movies. Yes, I don't think there's any doubt.
I'm fascinated to see, and all we can do is conjecture now. Is what are they going to adapt from the stories for the second one?
Yeah, what's if there might be some fallout from Infinity War that might
perhaps
number 4, Avengers 4. We still don't really know anything about that one.
Yeah, well, if a lot of the action's happening in Wakanda, the country might suffer, and faith and his leadership and T'Challa's leadership might suffer as a result. So that could springboard from that. I'm trying to think of other villains they might use. I mean, they've killed the 2 biggest ones, so unless they do the sound being claw after all. I mean, there's like Venom. They could do a Chubby from the Priest run.
Yeah.
Well, couldn't they do what Ant-Man's doing and essentially taking, I guess, Iron Man stuff and making that into villains for him? So couldn't they do... I guess maybe it's going to be a little bit more difficult with Wakanda because most of the villains we think of are on the...
And the other thing is that I think the Panther's character is so compelling, his world is so compelling, you don't even necessarily need a super villain in the next film. You could just explore his struggles, dealing with the United States, for example, all of that. I mean, you can make a perfectly compelling movie out of that.
Well, maybe Steve Rogers will be the villain next time. Then
Who knows? But please bring Coogler back. Number one, I really hope they keep him on as the director.
I think he is signed on. I might be.
I hope so because, boy, I'm raising my fountain drink soda to you, sir, and salutations. I mean, that's salute. I mean, that was.
You said you saw Creed, right?
Oh, I love Creed
because he's not doing the sequel. He's not.
I heard he wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was kind of disappointed with that.
Me too. Yeah, Creed was fantastic. And I've always loved the Rocky films, but that was Jordan again, though.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's bulking up for that next role. I mean,
to be
huge.
for Creed too. Yeah,
I've seen him in some interviews, and he's like monstrous.
Yeah,
bigger than he was as Killmonger.
Wow. And he was pretty intimidating as Killmonger.
Oh yeah.
I
mean, in all the previews I saw, he had those bumps, and I just assumed
each one's a kill. They said in the story.
When you were like, each one of those is when he said that, I was like, wait a minute, we already saw his chest, and he's got tons of those things. And then when was it Ross who said that he would kill people like it was a video game? They were sent in the special bit. Like, wow. Basically, his whole life was to train for that one moment.
Right. It's like he said, all that killing was just to lead him to that confrontation with T'Challa.
And by the way, I loved the way they portrayed T'Challa's ruling council. Like the one tribal leader with like that technological...
the disc in his lower lip.
Yeah, oh, fantastic. Again, that incorporation of tribal ritual with the technology, which is so inherent to
wearing
Wakanda.
that and the loud green Edward Nygma suit.
And you had like the elderly woman, like all these different tribal leaders who were acting as the council, and those are great touches.
The use of the incorporation of tribal ritual into this very technologically advanced society, I thought was
and you saw that in when he fights M'Baku in the ceremonial battle on Warrior Falls, and they show the different tribal leaders,
what they're all doing in the background, and how the different tribal leaders one by one said, "The such and such tribe will not challenge today."
Right.
I heard once just a brief review of John Ford's work on Turner Classic, just like a little
I love John Ford.
Little blurb that they did between features a few years ago. Although whoever was whatever film expert was talking about it said that one way you could characterize his work was that it was a collection of rituals, like of American life for the most part, especially of decades past.
Yeah,
I think you could say the same thing for what Coogler did with Wakandan society and ritual.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, because by the end of that movie, even if you had never read the books, I think it's fair to say you had at least a good grasp of that world and how it functioned. And just seeing like people in the marketplace, and he's walking through it, with his sister, with Nakia. That they really, I think more effect. I mean, as much as I enjoyed the way they rendered Asgard, I think this was more effective. I think they really captured just the way that world functions and the feel of it. It was magnificent, absolutely magnificent.
Did you think it? So one of the things I said about I'm not an overly big fan of Spider-Man: Homecoming. I thought he was better written in Civil War than he was in his solo movie.
I would agree with that.
Did you think there was any type of continuity issues with how he was written in Civil War versus
T'Challa?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
I think in Civil War, because of the nature of the story, you saw him more just as the Black Panther fighting, basically. But for me, Civil War, the key scene for T'Challa in that movie, where I felt I could tell right away that even though he was a supporting character, they nailed the character, is when he talks to the Black Widow in these early scenes, both before and after his father is killed. And just the poise and the focus and the restraint, and when it's just this little scene, but he pulls up in his convoy of cars and he gets out, and there's a Dora Milaje with him, and she says to the Black Widow, "Move, or I will move you." And Black Widow's like, "Yeah, I'd like to see that." And then T'Challa just kind of smirks and just nods his head, and the Dora Milaje moves away. And I was like, "They have it."
I think
like they totally have it. Like that's it.
As much as I'd like to see that.
Yeah, that's what he said. Yeah,
because an earlier scene where
and when he spares Baron Zemo at the end, he's like, "I will not let my life be consumed by revenge as yours has," and he blocks the shot with his vibranium gauntlet. I thought that was. I could tell when I saw that I was confident that his movie was going to be good, because I could tell they really got the character. So Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say there was when you said about Natasha and him discussing it, it both seems as though neither one of them were up for diplomacy. So when he becomes king, it was one of those things. I guess his thing was when he saw his dad in the land of the dead, he wasn't, which I thought was a great line, that he wasn't ready to move on from his dad passing away, but that he was basically ready to be king. It's just not with his dad there. So I thought that seemed a little off. Where before it was, I'm not really one for diplomacy, and then he's kind of okay. I am ready for diplomacy. The other thing was I didn't realize that it was a magic potion that gave the powers.
Yes.
And it seemed as though the other little thing that I noticed was a continuity type of error is I was under the impression that you're either the king or you're Black Panther.
No.
And then the fact that his dad's still king, but he is a Black Panther. And he's not king.
I'm assuming because his father was just old, so he had to
just
pass the mantle on. But traditionally in the comic books, each king... Now, and they didn't reference this directly, but I like how they did it. You have to be of that bloodline to consume the heart-shaped herb. So they made Jadaka, Killmonger, part of the bloodline. In the Priest run, there's a classic story where Jadaka beats T'Challa. He drinks the heart-shaped herb, and he falls into a coma because he's not in the actual bloodline.
And they were going to give it to M'Baku in the
I was
movie.
just thinking.
Yeah, so... I don't know. I mean, they didn't go into that overtly in the movie. Maybe they're not going to in that sense. But traditionally, you have to be of that family line, and each king, takes the heart-shaped herb and becomes the Black Panther.
So now, would his dad still retain the powers if he just?
That's a good question. I don't know. Actually, that's a very good question. Because in the comic, his father was killed much younger. Like his father was still like in his more or less his prime,
And it was Claw who did the killing.
and Claw killed him. So. They tweaked that for the movie, but
Did he have to ingest the purple herb regularly, T'Challa, or any of them really, or was it a one-time thing?
I think it's a one-time thing. I think, but minor modifications for
Sure.
And then of course Killmonger burns the entire
That we know.
grove.
Yeah, I'm sure there are fail-safes to
Yeah,
that.
well, Wakandans always have fail-safes.
Right, exactly.
This is a man who has a file on his desk saying in case of an attack by Galactus. So there's always a fail-safe.
The other thing I kept thinking, and this happens all the time, I kept thinking of is this is kind of, I wonder if Stan Lee and Kirby were thinking about the Phantom with this. Now, again, he's not the white person who came to this, this island in Africa, but the same type of thing of there's a bloodline where, the father passes on the mantle of the Phantom down and down, so that's why it's the ghost.
It's possible. Certainly they would know. Kirby and Lee and Kirby both would know about the Phantom.
Right. Well, as a couple of folks on the forum talkback thread for our top 5 legacy heroes episode, he is kind of the first legacy hero in comics.
Yeah. So I'd like to think that Lee and Kirby also wanted to, from a business standpoint, capture the black reader in comics because they knew there were black kids who read comics, and also because, excuse me, they were also reaching out to, that part of our population through this character.
Yeah, I was just kind of like the concept, that aspect of it. I mean, I've seen more comparisons of Batman and Black Panther, but then again, everyone compares Batman with any type
That's
of...
only because of Priest, because he consciously said, I want to basically make the Black Panther in some ways like the Batman of the Marvel Universe.
Only more so because he's got the resources of a whole nation to back him up.
Because I get into discussions all the time where people say Moon Knight is just a Batman. And I was like, if you know the Shadow, then you know that Moon Knight's basically just a comic book superhero version of the Shadow.
Yeah.
So
that's a good point. By the way, I love seeing all the creators' names at the end.
I somehow I missed the list.
It went by pretty fast. I have to see it again because I didn't actually get the chance to read because there was a lot of names up there. I saw like Amon and Veludo, the art team from the Priest run. I saw Don McGregor's name. I saw Gene Colan. I'm sure Priest's name was up there, but I didn't catch it.
I think I saw it in the beginning for some reason.
Maybe so.
I know I saw his name somewhere.
Okay, well, damn well better.
Well, if they put Almond and Veludo up there, but not Priest, that
Yeah.
would be a heck of a snub.
Yeah, so I'm sure it's there. I just missed it.
He didn't do any type of cameo?
Not that I know of.
Because if they pulled so much from his run, it'd be weird they wouldn't see if he'd be...
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, the movie was basically primarily Don McGregor and Christopher Priest stories, essentially, with the Lee Kirby origins and then a little bit from what Hudlin did with Shuri. Well, they used Shuri in a different way. in a way that I thought was very effective. But
A little bit of mild dissent from within.
yeah, but without McGregor and Priest, there's no movie. Quite frankly, at least from where I'm coming from as a reader of the stories, I'd like to think Don McGregor was very happy with the way they used Killmonger because that's his creation in the movie. So, any closing comments, gentlemen? Any other thoughts?
Well, one thing that I took away from that
Yes.
Time magazine review that I mentioned.
I have to read that. I haven't read that yet.
The writer said, he pointed out that this is probably the first really big-budget blockbuster Hollywood film that's ever been produced with a black director and a predominantly black cast. So in that respect, and this is what people are talking about, or one of the things they're talking about when they talk about the importance of this film. It's a sign that black filmmaking need not be confined to the ghetto of Hollywood anymore. It's now beginning to come into its own.
As it should. I mean, I don't think there's any argument about that. I mean, ideally, we want to get to a point in our nation, and it's with our nation's racial history, it's very difficult. Where, and this is not anytime soon, but where people aren't even necessarily looking at things in that way, in the sense that these are just all American filmmakers. But I understand because of our nation's history, we're not at that point yet.
Not quite,
So,
but
yeah.
making baby steps.
Yeah.
And this is a very important one.
Absolutely.
Just to piggyback off of that, I remember reading an article about Homecoming, how Midtown High the students were going to be diverse as New York is. I remember reading the article thinking, why is this even an article? It should just be that way. We shouldn't even have to bring it to everyone's attention. It should just be the norm.
Well,
I understand it's not, because as much as I prefer the Raimi Spider-Man, when you look at Midtown High, that just in New York, just didn't seem
Midtown's so white.
Yeah. So, but to me, we should be 2018. This should just be the norm. But I understand it's not the norm, and that's why we have those articles. No, I thought overall, I thought this was a spectacular movie. Again, the hype leading in, I think, took away some of my enjoyment of it. But I thought it was great as a standalone, and I'm curious to see how it fits in more so with Infinity War.
Yep, you don't have long to wait.
And that's a good point because, again, we don't know what the Marvel Cinematic Universe is going to look like after the conclusion of the two-part Infinity War. I mean, who's going to still be alive?
Yeah.
Yep, when the Infinity Stones are involved,
Yeah.
anything,
Any-
literally
reality,
anything
reality
could
can be
happen.
altered. I mean, I've often, posited that they may end the first Infinity War installment with everybody being dead
Yep.
because we know that they can use, the gems to resurrect people, essentially. I find I'm hard-pressed to see how these heroes can, at least initially, really defeat Thanos. We'll see. But I have a sneaking suspicion that Steve Rogers is going to play a key role here in one way or another.
Probably.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
his,
and I
his
think-
contract is coming up, right? Chris Evans doesn't have that many movies left.
Well, it ended with Infinity War, but he signed on to, as far as we know, just do 4 because he said it was needed for the story. He felt I need to do this. I've read some places that he wants to do some more after that. I've read other places that he's essentially, but it sounds like the majority of them are going to be done. I have a theory with Kevin that since now that Fox is kind of giving back the movies, that the next series of build-ups could focus around the Fantastic Four instead of the Avengers.
Wait, are they giving the Fantastic Four back?
I just heard the Fox Studios.
God, I hope so, because that last movie was...
It sounds as though they're going to have...
If I was a drinker, I wouldn't have made it out of that movie.
They're going to be able to play with the X-Men and with the Fantastic Four. And my thing is, how many of these characters have some type of relationship with the Fantastic Four? Black Panther, Peter Parker.
Well, I'm a huge FF fan. I look forward in a future episode where I want to talk about the new Marvel 2-in-1 book, which I'm really enjoying. But the Fantastic Four in the comic universe are the foundation of everything.
Yeah.
So, a traditional moviegoer maybe wouldn't feel this, but for me, I'm like, I feel their absence in every single film, basically. And I mean, I'd like to think that someday that Fox will wake up the way Sony did and like, okay, we're not doing these as well as we should, and we'll somehow work them in.
They're supposed to be the trailblazers. They're the super explorers of the Marvel Universe.
Yeah.
They discover all these fantastic locales that other superheroes then get to come along and play and fight in.
I'm like 90% sure the deal that was signed recently means that the Fantastic Four and X-Men at some point in the future will be incorporated in the MCU. But I think Kevin Feige said it wouldn't be till after 2020.
Oh, that'd be great. Too bad Hugh Jackman's retired from being
I
Wolverine.
know, but I also heard that he had said that he would consider coming back if X-Men were part of the MCU. But I think at this point it would maybe just be better to get recast.
Start over.
Because how many movies would you get out of him?
Yeah, good
He played the
point.
character for what, 15 years?
I think since 99?
Well, the X-Men was 2000, the
Was it?
first
Okay.
movie.
That's
Yeah.
what I thought, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's nearly 20 years
And
now.
I thought Logan was tremendous.
Oh, yeah.
Oh man, whew.
I think that was the best comic
Yeah.
book movie last year.
It was outstanding. Well, my final comments are just that as many listeners know, I'm a hardcore lover of this character. I mean, I love the spotlight we did a couple years ago on the Black Panther. My expectations were met, and they were exceeded. I mean, I had high hopes going in, reading the interviews, seeing the trailers, and again, one of the best adaptations of a comic character I've seen in film yet. So, ratings, gentlemen. Murd?
I give it a 5, and you know that I don't do that lightly.
You do not do it lightly. 5 frickin' swears for Murd. Matty Poo?
You have to go with a 4.5.
4.5, and of course I give it a scintillating, from the mountaintops, full-throated 5 frickin' swears.
So, before we sign off, is there any Marvel movies that you put above this? Or is this kind of the range? See, for me,
That's a good question.
It's still hard for me to take away from Winter Soldier. I can watch one over and over and over again.
The only Marvel movie that I would say compares to this, and I mean, I may change as I think about this more, but to me, Winter Soldier is still one of the best. Like, Winter Soldier feels like a 1970s paranoid espionage film recast with superheroes. That's a movie I can watch repeatedly.
Yeah.
It's easily one of the best films they've done. This movie I would put right up there with it. I mean, the original Iron Man I think is outstanding, the way they captured that character. The first Avengers movie I think is tremendous. I've loved all these films to varying degrees. I just think this movie and Winter Soldier, maybe a couple others, they're just on another level essentially.
I believe FX is showing Iron Man 3 and Iron Man 2, and I find myself getting less and less interested in those because they felt like they had a good foundation, and then they just kind of went off in its own far tangent compared to the rest. I think that what brings me in more is I like Rhodey. I like the fact that Black Widow was involved, and then kind of the third one, you're just like I like Iron Legion, but beyond that, it's just kind of
give us a movie about Black Widow and or Rhodey instead.
And why we've not had a Black Widow movie yet?
Well, supposedly that's in the process now. That the train is.
Well, have you guys noticed the Jennifer Lawrence movie that's coming
Black
out?
Sparrow?
Red Sparrow. I saw the
yeah.
trailer. I'm like, this is the Black Widow story.
It is.
Well,
It's like
fact,
Black Widow. It's totally Black Widow, right?
In fact, I think the director was fielding questions about or trying to say how it's different.
It's not different.
I mean, it's the exact same thing.
Yeah. Some stuff from the Agent Carter as well in there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, granted, I'm only going by what I've read in the trailers, but if you have like this woman in this secret program where they're indoctrinating all these people to be women to be intelligence agents, and she's a master of like disguise, infiltration, like. I mean, I love Jennifer Lawrence; she's a great actress. But like, this sounds like the Black Widow story. Basically.
I'm almost wondering if part of that is the reason why, like, is a part that is a part Wonder Woman that they're like, we got to do a Black Widow movie because basically Red Sparrow is the Black Widow, but now we got to do something.
Right.
Or you could also do a great Black Widow Netflix series, for that matter. I mean, I'd love to see her interact with Matt Murdock, for example.
Yeah,
that'd be great. Anyway, all right. Well,
to give my own answer to your question, though, Matt. There may be some MCU movies out there that I would hail as better films, but I don't think there has been another superhero movie from Marvel Studios or anywhere that is a more perfect realization of the potential of the source material. That is
here
where I stand on Black Panther the movie. Yeah, good to know we all had a satisfying cinematic experience here. Wakanda Forever.
Indeed.
All right, and this episode was brought to you by the Denver Independent Comics and Art Expo, which is happening in the Denver area, April 14th and 15th, 2018. Visit dinkdenver.com for more details. And also by the Collection Drawer Company, makers of the Drawer Box Storage System, the easy access solution for the storage of your comic books. Check them out at collectiondrawer.com. If you'd like to send us an email, the address is comicgeekspeak@gmail.com. If you'd like to leave a voicemail, the number to call is 267-702-6642. You can like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter, where our handle is @comicgeekspeak. You can visit thecomicforums.vanillaforums.com, which is our talkback and feedback center on the internet. And also, when you go there, you can leave feedback about this episode, share your own opinions about the Black Panther film, and also engage in online discussions with your fellow CGS listeners and fans about various geeky topics. We would also encourage you to check out the episode of Comic Geek Speak in which our resident expert on the subject, Chris Eberly, holds forth at length about the entire history of the Black Panther character. Go to comicgeekspeak.com and find episode 1604. That was our Black Panther Spotlight. Lots of valuable information there.
It was back in 2016, I believe.
Oh, yes, that's right, for the 50th anniversary of the character. So check that out, and you'll gain some valuable information that will help you appreciate the Black Panther movie all the more. We'd also like to thank everyone who has donated to the podcast in one way or another over the years. We really appreciate it. The podcast would not be what it is today without your help. And as always, we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one listener at a time.